There are seasons in life when pain feels completely meaningless. You go through disappointment, rejection, betrayal, failure, loneliness, financial pressure, uncertainty, and moments when nothing seems to work according to your plans. In those moments, it is difficult to believe that anything good could come from what you are experiencing. You look at the situation and see only what has been taken from you. You see the relationship that ended, the opportunity you lost, the dream that did not happen, or the door that remained closed no matter how hard you knocked. But pain has a way of developing things inside you that comfort never could. Some lessons cannot be learned while everything is going well. Strength is often developed when you are forced to stand without the support you expected. Patience grows when answers do not come immediately. Wisdom develops when experience teaches you what advice alone never could. The difficult season may not have been what you wanted, but it can still become part of what prepares you for what comes next. Sometimes you are asking God to remove a situation when the greater work is happening within you through that situation. You may be asking for the storm to stop while something inside you is being strengthened to survive the storm. You may be asking for the pressure to disappear while the pressure is revealing how much capacity you actually possess. A person who has never faced difficulty may have confidence only when circumstances are favorable, but a person who has endured difficult seasons learns how to remain standing when circumstances change. That kind of strength cannot be purchased. It cannot be borrowed from somebody else. It is developed through experience. There are things you now understand because you had to walk through them personally. There are boundaries you now have because somebody crossed them. There are standards you now maintain because you once tolerated what you should never have accepted. There are decisions you now make differently because experience taught you the cost of making the wrong ones. Your pain also has a way of exposing what was hidden. Difficult seasons reveal people, motives, habits, weaknesses, and priorities. When everything is comfortable, it is easy to believe that everyone around you genuinely supports you. But when you enter a difficult season, you discover who stays, who disappears, who encourages you, who takes advantage of your weakness, and who only wanted access to the version of you that could benefit them. This knowledge may hurt initially, but it can save you from repeating the same mistakes. Sometimes you needed to see certain things clearly. Sometimes disappointment was the price of gaining discernment. You may have lost relationships, but you gained understanding. You may have lost trust in certain people, but you gained a deeper understanding of who deserves your trust. You may have experienced betrayal, but you learned that your future cannot depend entirely on the loyalty of other people. Pain can also force you to discover yourself. When everything around you is stable, you may never ask difficult questions about who you are, what you believe, what you value, or where you are going. But when life becomes uncomfortable, you begin looking inward. You discover whether you can remain disciplined without recognition. You discover whether you can continue believing when results are delayed. You discover whether your identity is based on people's approval or something deeper. You begin separating what you genuinely want from what you were taught to want. You realize that some of your goals were never really yours. They were expectations inherited from family, society, friends, or people whose approval you were trying to earn. The difficult season becomes a mirror. It shows you what needs to change, what needs to grow, and what needs to be released. The pain becomes an invitation to rebuild yourself with greater awareness. This is why you should never underestimate what a difficult season can produce in you. The person who survived rejection may develop greater courage. The person who survived failure may develop greater discipline. The person who experienced loneliness may learn how to become comfortable with their own presence. The person who lost everything they thought they needed may discover that their identity was never supposed to depend on possessions, relationships, status, or applause. What looked like destruction can become reconstruction. What looked like an ending can become the beginning of a stronger foundation. You may have entered that season asking, "Why is this happening?" But eventually you may begin asking, "What is this developing in me?" That question shifts your attention from helplessness to growth. It does not deny the pain. It gives the pain a place in your development instead of allowing it to become the definition of your life. There is also a point when you have to stop measuring your life by what you lost and start measuring it by what you gained through the experience. You gain knowledge that cannot be taught in a classroom. You gain discernment that protects your future. You gain patience that keeps you from making desperate decisions. You gain resilience that allows you to stand when circumstances become unstable. You gain the ability to recognize what is healthy and what is destructive. You gained a deeper understanding of yourself. You learn that you can survive days you once believed would destroy you. You learn that tears do not mean weakness and that struggling does not mean failure. You learn that sometimes progress is simply refusing to quit. Every time you continued despite the pain, something inside you became stronger. Every time you got back up, you proved that the situation did not have the final authority over your life. Every difficult chapter left something behind: wisdom, strength, clarity, discipline, courage, or a deeper awareness of who you are becoming. You cannot walk through difficult seasons and remain exactly the same person you were before them. Life has a way of changing you through every experience, especially the experiences you never wanted. There are moments that force you to grow because remaining the same person is no longer possible. You begin a difficult season with certain beliefs about people, relationships, success, failure, and even yourself. Then life challenges those beliefs. You discover that some people you trusted were not meant to remain in your life. You discover that some things you thought you needed were actually keeping you dependent. You discover that some goals were based more on approval than purpose. You discover that strength does not always look like winning. Sometimes strength looks like getting out of bed, continuing your responsibilities, protecting your peace, and refusing to allow disappointment to destroy your character. The experiences you survived have left an imprint on you, but that imprint does not have to be negative. It can become evidence of growth. There was a version of you that entered every difficult situation believing that things would always work out according to your expectations. That version of you may have trusted too quickly, explained yourself too much, tolerated too much, and depended heavily on the approval of others. But experience has a way of removing illusions. You begin to understand that not everyone deserves unlimited access to your life. You learn that kindness does not require allowing people to repeatedly disrespect you. You learn that forgiveness does not mean returning to the same environment that wounded you. You learn that loving someone does not mean abandoning yourself for them. These lessons may have come through painful experiences, but they changed your standards. You became more aware of what you will accept and what you will no longer tolerate. The person you are becoming has greater clarity because the person you had to experience certain things to understand them. Your perspective changes when you have survived something that once seemed impossible to survive. Before the struggle, you may have looked at certain problems and believed they were the end of your story. But after walking through them, you realize that what felt like the end was actually another chapter. You begin to understand that circumstances can change. People can leave and life can continue. Plans can fail and new plans can emerge. Doors can close and different doors can eventually open. You stop treating temporary situations as permanent identities. A failed relationship does not mean you are incapable of being loved. A failed business does not mean you are incapable of succeeding. A rejected opportunity does not mean you have no value. A difficult year does not mean your entire life will be difficult. Survival teaches you to separate an event from your identity. Something happened to you, but that event does not get to become the definition of who you are. You also become more selective about where you invest your energy. Before certain experiences, you may have spent too much time trying to convince people to understand you, accept you, appreciate you, or recognize your worth. But after being exhausted by one-sided relationships and unnecessary battles, you begin to understand the value of silence. You realize that you do not have to respond to everything. You do not have to defend yourself against every accusation. You do not have to prove your intentions to people committed to misunderstanding you. You do not have to chase people who have already decided to walk away. This does not mean you become cold. It means you become intentional. You learn that peace requires boundaries. You learn that your attention is valuable. You learn that not every argument deserves your participation, and not every person deserves a permanent place in your thoughts. The difficult seasons also change the way you see success. At one point, success may have meant having more money, receiving recognition, achieving a particular position, or being admired by others. But after experiencing seasons where none of those things could solve your deepest problems, your definition begins to mature. You start valuing peace. You value meaningful relationships. You value purpose. You value integrity. You value waking up with a clear mind and knowing that you are living according to your principles. You begin to understand that a successful life is not simply a life that looks impressive from the outside. It is a life that is aligned on the inside. You can have achievements and still be empty. You can have attention and still be lonely. You can have possessions and still lack peace. The experiences you survived can teach you to pursue substance instead of appearance. Most importantly, everything you survived can change the way you see yourself. You may have discovered strengths you never knew existed. You may have learned that you can endure uncertainty without completely falling apart. You may have learned to make decisions without everyone agreeing with you. You may have learned to stand alone when necessary. You may have discovered that you are capable of rebuilding after losing something important. These discoveries matter because confidence is not always created by receiving compliments. Sometimes confidence comes from evidence. You know you are stronger because you remember what you survived. You know you can handle difficulty because you have already handled difficulty. You know you can begin again because you have already begun again. Your history becomes proof that circumstances can change and that you possess the capacity to adapt, learn, rebuild, and continue moving forward. You should not wish away every difficult experience simply because it hurt you. Some experiences became part of your education. They taught you what comfort never could. They changed your thinking, sharpened your judgment, strengthened your character, and made you more conscious of the person you want to become. The goal is not to become the person you were before everything happened. The goal is to become wiser because everything happened. You are allowed to outgrow old patterns. You are allowed to change your priorities. You are allowed to become quieter, more disciplined, more selective, and more focused. You are allowed to stop carrying identities that were created during painful seasons. The fact that you survived something does not mean you must continue behaving as though you are still trapped inside it. The experience changed you, but now you get to decide what those changes will produce in your life. There are moments in life when a closed door feels like rejection, failure, or punishment. You worked for something, prayed for something, prepared yourself for something, and believed that it was finally going to happen, only to watch the opportunity disappear. A relationship ends when you thought it was becoming permanent. A job opportunity goes to someone else. A plan you invested months or years into suddenly collapses. Someone you expected to remain in your life walks away. In that moment, you naturally ask, why? You wonder what you did wrong and why the path that seemed so promising suddenly became unavailable. But not every closed door is evidence that you are failing. Sometimes a closed door is protection from something you cannot yet see. Sometimes what feels like rejection is actually redirection. You may be looking at the door that closed while life is preparing you for a path you would never have chosen on your own. You often judge opportunities by how badly you want them, but wanting something does not automatically mean it is good for you. There are things you can desire with your whole heart that still may not belong in your future. You can become emotionally attached to a particular outcome and assume that because you worked hard for it, it must be right. But effort alone does not make something purposeful. Sometimes the thing you are fighting hardest to keep is the very thing preventing you from moving forward. A closed door can interrupt your plans, but interruption is not always destruction. Sometimes interruption creates space. When something leaves your life, you suddenly have room to discover something else. When one path becomes unavailable, you are forced to look in another direction. When your original plan stops working, you may finally begin asking deeper questions about what you actually want and where you are actually supposed to go. Some closed doors are necessary because they separate you from environments that cannot support your growth. You may have wanted to remain somewhere because it was familiar, even though it was slowly reducing your confidence, disciplines, or sense of purpose. Familiarity can make unhealthy situations feel safe simply because you know how to survive them. You can become comfortable with environments that are not helping you become better. You can become attached to people who only know the old version of you. You can continue returning to places where your potential is constantly underestimated because at least you know what to expect there. Then the door closes and you are forced into uncertainty. At first, uncertainty feels frightening, but sometimes uncertainty is exactly where growth begins. When you can no longer depend on what is familiar, you are forced to discover what you are capable of becoming. There are also doors that close because the timing is wrong. You may be qualified but not ready. You may have the opportunity but not the maturity required to handle it. You may want the responsibility without yet possessing the capacity to carry it. Sometimes you think you need an opportunity when what you actually need is preparation. If you receive something too early, you may lose it because you do not yet know how to manage it. That is why delays can be valuable. A delay can develop your character before your circumstances change. It can teach you discipline before you receive greater responsibility. It can teach you patience before you receive greater influence. It can teach you wisdom before you receive greater resources. The waiting period may feel like nothing is happening, but internal development can be taking place while external circumstances remain unchanged. A closed door can also expose where your identity has been placed. If losing one opportunity completely destroys your sense of worth, then perhaps your identity was attached too tightly to that opportunity. If one person's rejection makes you believe that you are worthless, then perhaps you were allowing another person's opinion to determine your value. If one failure convinces you that you can never succeed, then perhaps you were defining yourself by an outcome instead of your character. Closed doors have a way of testing what you believe about yourself. They force you to separate your worth from your circumstances. You are still valuable when someone says no. You are still capable when a plan fails. You are still worthy when someone chooses another person. You are still becoming even when nothing appears to be moving. A closed door can challenge your confidence, but it can also build a deeper confidence that is not dependent on constant success. Sometimes you will only understand the reason for a closed door after you have walked far enough away from it. While standing in front of it, you may only see disappointment. Months or years later, you may look back and realize that staying there would have cost you more than leaving ever did. You may discover that the relationship you desperately wanted would have prevented you from becoming who you needed to become. You may realize that the job you did not receive would have kept you in an environment that limited your growth. You may understand that the opportunity you lost would have taken you in a direction completely different from your deeper purpose. Distance can provide perspective. What you could not understand emotionally in the moment may become obvious when you look at it with greater maturity. This is why you cannot spend your entire life standing outside a door that has already closed. There comes a time when you must stop knocking and start moving. You cannot build your future while constantly trying to resurrect your past. You cannot discover a new direction while remaining obsessed with the direction that disappeared. A closed door deserves acceptance, not endless worship. Learn from it. Grieve it if necessary. Understand what it taught you, but do not allow it to become the center of your life. There are paths you have not discovered because you are still staring at the one that ended. There are possibilities you cannot see because disappointment has captured your attention. There are opportunities waiting for a version of you that is no longer afraid to move forward. The most powerful response to a closed door is not bitterness. It is growth. Become so focused on developing yourself that rejection no longer has the power to define you. Become disciplined enough to continue when plans change. Become wise enough to recognize that every opportunity is not your opportunity. Become secure enough to accept that some people will leave. Become mature enough to understand that losing something does not automatically mean you lost your future. Your future is bigger than one person, one job, one relationship, one business, one season, or one opportunity. A single closed door cannot cancel everything that is still possible. You may not understand the redirection immediately, but you can continue developing while the next path becomes clearer. What feels like an ending may simply be the point where one chapter stops so another direction can begin. There comes a point in your life when you must understand that yesterday has already happened, and no amount of replaying it will change the outcome. You can remember what happened, study what went wrong, recognize the mistakes, and learn from the experience, but you cannot go backward and rewrite the chapter. Yet many people continue living in conversations that ended years ago, carrying words that were spoken long ago, reliving betrayals, replaying failures, and imagining how different life would be if they had made another decision. They wake up in the present but emotionally remain in the past. Their circumstances have changed, their environment has changed, and perhaps even the people around them have changed, but internally they are still responding to something that happened before. You cannot build a new future while constantly giving your emotional energy to an old chapter. The past may deserve your understanding, but it does not deserve unlimited control over your present. Sometimes you carry yesterday because you believe holding on to the pain protects you from experiencing it again. You tell yourself that if you remember every betrayal, you will never trust the wrong person again. If you remember every failure, you will never make the same mistake. If you remember every rejection, you will never allow yourself to become vulnerable. But there is a difference between learning from pain and becoming controlled by pain. Wisdom remembers the lesson. Fear remembers the wound. Wisdom says, I know what happened, and I will make better decisions because of it. Fear says, because it happened once, it will always happen again. One helps you move forward. The other keeps you trapped. You do not need to forget what happened in order to release its control over you. You can remember without reliving. You can understand without remaining angry. You can become wiser without becoming bitter. One of the heaviest things people carry from yesterday is resentment. Someone hurt you, disappointed you, betrayed your trust, abandoned you, or treated you unfairly, and part of you keeps waiting for them to recognize what they did. You replay the situation because you want justice. You want an explanation. You want them to understand how deeply their actions affected you. But sometimes the person who hurt you will never provide the closure you are waiting for. They may never apologize. They may never admit that they were wrong. They may never understand the damage they caused. If your peace depends on their apology, then you have handed them control over your future. Releasing the weight does not mean what happened was acceptable. It means you refuse to allow another person's actions to occupy permanent space in your mind. You can acknowledge the injustice without allowing it to become your identity. You also have to stop carrying old versions of yourself into new seasons. Maybe you made mistakes years ago. Maybe you failed publicly. Maybe you made decisions that you now regret. Maybe you stayed too long in the wrong relationship, trusted the wrong people, wasted time, ignored opportunities, or allowed fear to control important decisions. You may look back and feel embarrassed by the person you used to be. But remember this, you made those decisions with the understanding, maturity, information, and emotional capacity you had at that time. You know more now because you lived through those experiences. Growth means you should not have the same mindset forever. The person who made the mistake is not necessarily the person standing here today. If you have learned, changed, and matured, then you do not have to keep punishing yourself for something you have already outgrown. There is a dangerous habit of constantly saying, "This is just who I am because of what happened to me." You experience rejection, so you decided you cannot trust anyone. You experience failure, so you decided you are not capable. You experienced abandonment, so you decided that everyone eventually leaves. You experienced disappointment, so you stopped expecting anything good. These conclusions may have been understandable responses to painful experiences, but they do not have to become permanent identities. What happened to you may explain certain behaviors, but it does not have to control them forever. You are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to develop healthier patterns. You are allowed to trust again with wisdom. You are allowed to hope again with discernment. You are allowed to become emotionally stronger without becoming emotionally closed. Carrying yesterday also happens when you constantly compare the present to what used to be. You remember how successful you were before, how close you were to certain people, how much confidence you once had, or how different your life looked during another season. You keep looking backward and wondering why things are not the same anymore. But life is not designed to remain in one season. What worked for you 5 years ago may not be what you need today. Some relationships were appropriate for an earlier version of your life, but may not fit the person you are becoming. Some dreams were right for one season, but no longer represent your deeper purpose. Some environments helped you survive, but cannot help you grow. You must learn to appreciate what was without demanding that it return exactly as it was. The past can be honored without being recreated. You cannot enter a new season while constantly negotiating with an old one. There are things you need to leave where they happened. Some conversations do not need another response. Some people do not need another explanation. Some doors do not need another attempt. Some mistakes do not need another punishment. Some memories do not need another emotional performance. You have already spent enough energy trying to understand what cannot be changed. Your future requires that energy now. There is a life in front of you that needs your attention, your discipline, your creativity, your courage, and your focus. Every hour you spend emotionally living in yesterday is an hour you are not using to construct tomorrow. Letting go does not mean becoming careless about the past. It means putting the past in its proper position. Let it become a teacher instead of a prison. Let your failures teach you without defining you. Let your disappointments sharpen your judgment without destroying your hope. Let your painful experiences develop your character without controlling your personality. Let the people who left teach you the value of healthy relationships without convincing you that nobody can be trusted. Let your mistakes develop humility without destroying your confidence. Your past can become a library of lessons instead of a warehouse of pain. You can take what is useful and leave what is no longer necessary. There is a version of your future that requires you to stop looking backward. It requires you to believe that what happened before does not have to determine what happens next. You may not be able to change yesterday, but you can change what yesterday produces in you. You can take the lesson and leave the limitation. You can take the wisdom and leave the fear. You can take the experience and leave the bitterness. You can take the strength and leave the identity that was built around survival. Every new day gives you another opportunity to respond differently, think differently, build differently, and move differently. The past has already taken its turn. Your responsibility now is to stop allowing yesterday to consume the space that belongs to tomorrow. Surviving a difficult season is only part of the journey. There comes a point when you must decide what you are going to do with everything that happened to you. Pain can either become a permanent identity or become material for reconstruction. You have already experienced things that tested your patience, confidence, discipline, faith, and emotional strength. Now those experiences can become the foundation upon which you build something stronger. The goal is not simply to say, "I survived." The deeper question is, what am I going to build because I survived? Every lesson you gained has value when you apply it. Every difficult experience can contribute to greater wisdom when you refuse to waste it. You do not have to remain the person who was merely trying to make it through the storm. You can become the person who learned how to build after the storm passed. Your survival gave you information about yourself that comfort could never reveal. You discovered how you respond under pressure. You discovered whether you can remain disciplined when nobody is watching. You discovered how much you can endure when circumstances do not cooperate with your plans. You learned what happens when you depend too heavily on other people's approval. You learned the cost of ignoring warning signs. You learned the importance of boundaries, patience, preparation, and self-respect. These lessons are not small, they are building materials. A person who has learned from experience possesses something that cannot be gained simply by reading about success. Experience gives depth, it gives perspective. It gives you the ability to recognize patterns before they become problems. When you use these lessons correctly, your past becomes an advantage rather than an anchor. Building a new version of yourself begins with changing the way you think. Your circumstances may have changed, but if your mindset remains trapped in the same patterns, you will continue reproducing the same results. You cannot build a new life with an old mentality. If you still believe that you are powerless, you will continue surrendering your decisions to circumstances. If you still believe that you need everyone's approval, you will continue compromising yourself to be accepted. If you still believe that failure means you are incapable, you will avoid opportunities that require courage. If you still believe that your past determines your future, you will never give yourself permission to become different. Your transformation begins when you start challenging the beliefs that were formed during difficult seasons. You begin asking whether those beliefs are actually true or whether they were simply survival responses. You also build yourself through discipline. Difficult experiences often teach you that motivation cannot carry you through everything. There will be days when you do not feel inspired, confident, or excited about your future. There will be mornings when the old version of you wants to return to familiar habits because changing requires effort. This is where discipline becomes important. Discipline means doing what needs to be done even when your emotions are not cooperating. It means keeping promises to yourself. It means protecting your time, controlling your attention, developing your abilities, and refusing to repeatedly return to behaviors that have already proven destructive. You cannot build a powerful future through occasional effort. You build it through consistent decisions repeated over time. Every disciplined action becomes a vote for the person you are becoming. Your relationships must also change when you change. One of the biggest mistakes people make is trying to become a new person while maintaining every old connection, habit, environment, and expectation. Growth often changes what you are willing to participate in. You begin to recognize that some conversations drain you, some environments distract you, and some relationships constantly pull you toward an older version of yourself. This does not mean you have to become arrogant or disrespectful. It means you become conscious of influence. You understand that what surrounds you affects what develops within you. If you want greater peace, you cannot constantly invite chaos into your life. If you want greater discipline, you cannot repeatedly surround yourself with people who celebrate irresponsibility. If you want to grow, you have to make room for growth. Sometimes building yourself means becoming more selective about who has access to your time, attention, energy, and emotional world. You also have to rebuild your relationship with failure. The person you are becoming cannot be terrified of making mistakes. Failure is not always proof that you are moving in the wrong direction. Sometimes failure is information. It tells you what needs improvement. It shows you where your preparation was weak. It reveals assumptions that were incorrect. It forces you to become more creative and resilient. If you allow every failure to destroy your confidence, you will never develop the courage required for meaningful achievement. Instead, learn to examine failure without allowing it to define you. Ask what it taught you, what it exposed, and what you can do differently. The ability to recover from failure is one of the most important forms of strength because life will never guarantee that every attempt will succeed. Building a new version of yourself also requires you to stop seeking constant external validation. You cannot create a strong identity if your confidence rises and falls according to other people's opinions. Some people will misunderstand your growth. Some will criticize your boundaries. Some will question why you are changing. Some may prefer the old version of you because that version was easier for them to control, influence, or predict. But your responsibility is not to remain small so that other people can remain comfortable. You have to know why you are changing. You have to understand what you are building. When your purpose becomes clear, outside opinions become less powerful. You no longer need everyone to understand your journey before you continue walking it. Your survival should also make you more intentional with your time. You now understand that life is not unlimited. Difficult experiences often make this truth impossible to ignore. You realize that wasting years trying to impress people, chasing approval, repeating destructive patterns, or constantly waiting for the perfect moment carries a real cost. You begin treating your time as something valuable. You become more careful about what deserves your attention. You stop allowing every distraction to interrupt your priorities. You understand that the future is constructed through ordinary days, ordinary decisions, and ordinary habits. The life you want cannot be created only during moments of inspiration. It is built quietly through what you repeatedly choose when nobody is watching. The strongest version of you will not be created by pretending that you never suffered. It will be created by using what you suffered to become wiser. Your scars can remind you of what you endured without forcing you to remain in that season. Your failures can remind you to prepare without convincing you that you cannot succeed. Your disappointments can teach you discernment without destroying your ability to hope. Your loneliness can teach you independence without convincing you that you need nobody. Your rejection can teach you self-respect without making you resent everyone who says no. The experiences that once made you question yourself can eventually become the experiences that taught you how to know yourself. You are not required to rebuild the person you were before the struggle. You can build someone different, someone more disciplined, someone more patient, someone more focused, someone who understands boundaries, someone who knows when to speak and when to remain silent, someone who no longer chases what continually runs away, someone who does not collapse every time circumstances change, someone who can lose without losing identity, someone who can experience disappointment without abandoning purpose, someone who can walk into uncertainty without assuming that uncertainty means disaster. Your survival has already given you raw material. The next stage is deciding how you will shape it, how you will use it, and what kind of life you will construct from everything you have learned. There are seasons in life that make no sense while you are living through them. You can stand in the middle of a difficult chapter and see nothing except confusion. You wonder why the opportunity disappeared, why the relationship ended, why the plan failed, why the answer took so long, or why you had to endure something that seemed completely unnecessary. In the moment, you only see the loss. You cannot see the entire picture because you are standing inside one small part of the story. But time has a way of giving you perspective. What looks meaningless today can become understandable tomorrow. What feels like a detour can eventually reveal itself as preparation. What feels like an ending can become the beginning of something you could not have imagined. Sometimes the future gives you the understanding that the present was unable to provide. Think about how differently you understand certain events from your past now. There were probably things you cried over that you would not cry over today. There were people you once believed you could never live without, yet you eventually learned how to live without them. There were opportunities you desperately wanted, but later discovered that receiving them might have taken you somewhere you were never meant to remain. There were moments when you believed your life was falling apart, only to discover that your direction was changing. At the time, you could not see what was happening because your emotions were focused on the immediate pain, but distance created clarity. Sometimes you need to move forward before you can look backward with understanding. You need to become someone different before you can recognize why the old version of your life could not continue. The future can reveal the purpose hidden inside preparation. You may be in a season where nothing appears to be happening, but that does not mean nothing is developing. A seed underground looks inactive, but something is happening beneath the surface. In the same way, your character can be developing before your circumstances change. Your discipline can be developing before the opportunity arrives. Your wisdom can be developing before you receive greater responsibility. Your patience can be developing before the answer appears. Your ability to handle pressure can be developing before life places something significant in your hands. If you judge your progress only by visible results, you may believe you are behind when you are actually being prepared. Not every important transformation can be seen immediately. Sometimes you are asking for a new level of life while still carrying the habits and mindset of an old level. You want greater responsibility, but you have not developed the discipline to manage it. You want greater influence, but you have not learned how to handle criticism. You want deeper relationships, but you have not learned how to communicate honestly. You want financial growth, but you have not developed the habits required to manage resources wisely. You want peace, but you continue entertaining unnecessary conflict. Preparation often happens before promotion. The experiences that challenge you today can develop the qualities you will need tomorrow. You may not appreciate the training while you are in it, but later you may recognize that the pressure was developing your capacity. This is why you should be careful about judging your life too quickly. You may call something a failure because you have not yet seen what it produced. You may call something a delay because you have not yet discovered what it was preparing. You may call something rejection because you have not yet reached the place where another opportunity becomes visible. A chapter cannot always be understood from its first few pages. You need the entire story. Imagine reading one difficult paragraph and deciding that the entire book is terrible. That would be unreasonable. Yet people often do exactly that with their lives. They experience one painful season and assume the future will always look like that season. They experience one betrayal and decide nobody can be trusted. They experience one failure and decide they are incapable. They experience one closed door and decide there will never be another opportunity. But the story is not finished. The future also changes the meaning of what you thought you lost. There are losses that feel devastating because you cannot imagine what could possibly replace them. You may believe that a specific person was your only chance at happiness, that a particular career was your only opportunity for success, or that a specific plan was the only path toward fulfillment. But life can introduce possibilities you could not see while you were emotionally attached to the old one. You discover new abilities. You meet different people. You develop new interests. You enter environments that expose you to opportunities that were invisible before. Eventually, you may look back and realize that you were not losing your entire future. You were losing one version of it. The future showed you that your life was larger than the thing you were mourning. There is also wisdom in allowing yourself to grow beyond your old interpretation of events. Maybe you once believed that someone ruined your life, but later you realized they forced you to become independent. Maybe you once believed that failure destroyed your confidence, but later you realized it taught you how to prepare properly. Maybe you once believed that being alone meant you had been abandoned, but later you realized that solitude gave you space to discover yourself. Maybe you once believed that a closed door meant you were unwanted, but later you realized it redirected you toward an environment where your abilities could actually develop. The event did not necessarily change. Your understanding changed because you changed. Maturity gives you the ability to see old experiences through new eyes. You should not demand that every painful experience makes sense immediately. Some things require time. Some lessons become clear only after you have gained enough distance, knowledge, and maturity to understand them. Your responsibility is to keep growing while the meaning unfolds. Continue developing your character. Continue strengthening your discipline. Continue learning. Continue building. Continue becoming more aware of yourself. You do not need to understand every detail of the road before taking the next step. Sometimes clarity comes after movement. You move forward, then you look back and recognize why you had to travel that particular road. There will be moments when your future makes your past look completely different. You will recognize that the season you thought was destroying your confidence was actually teaching you resilience. You will see that the waiting period was developing patience. You will understand that the rejection forced you to discover another direction. You will realize that the people who left created space for healthier relationships. You will see that certain disappointments protected you from building your life around things that were never stable. You will recognize that your difficult seasons were not necessarily interruptions to your development. They were part of your development. The person you become can become the evidence that your difficult seasons were not wasted. When you become more disciplined, the past struggles with consistency become part of the story. When you become wiser, the mistakes you once regretted become lessons. When you become confident, the seasons of insecurity become reminders of how far you have traveled. When you become peaceful, the years of unnecessary conflict become evidence of what you no longer need. When you build something meaningful, the moments when you thought everything was over become part of the foundation underneath it. Your story is still developing, and that means you should be careful about making permanent conclusions from temporary circumstances. You do not know what 1 year from now will reveal about what you are experiencing today. You do not know what opportunity may emerge from a disappointment. You do not know what strength may develop through a struggle. You do not know what relationship, responsibility, or purpose may become possible because of the person you are becoming now. The chapter may be difficult, but it is still only a chapter. The meaning of what you survived may become clearer as you continue moving forward, growing through the lessons, and allowing the future to reveal what the present could not yet explain.